awareness. I mean,
Hey, that worked.
Excellent.
I think anybody in the room, you'll probably sound like Charlie Brown's teacher. So you may be picked up as background noise, but we're probably not going to tell exactly what you say with the distances and everything. So
But we'll make do.
yeah, we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. And when we send it to Peterson, still does our production from South Africa. He's in South Africa, right? So if you want, we'll even do our little shtick for you. Do you guys want to hear the little shtick?
Give them your
We'll need
introduction,
it,
guys.
and I need to look on the copy.
Yeah, so it's technically my bash, so it starts with you.
Let's see. Hello and welcome. This is Don Durham. I'm a hermit-like mendicant farmer and cantankerous curmudgeon. Dog and I live on a small farm in North Carolina where I grow food to give away, and he does whatever he wants to. I also work with folks who are trying to figure things out as a coach. Hey, Liam.
Hey, Don. I'm Liam, and this is the Bible Bash podcast, and we're all very glad that you're here. I am a trans, queerish, Jewish, practical mystic of sorts and a Bible geek living in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And Don and I are bringing you a Bible Bash from my shul. Why? Yeah, sort of live-ish. Won't be by the time you hear it, it won't be live-ish, but it's live now.
All the
And
mistakes are live.
all the mistakes are live.
What are you going to talk to us about?
So what I have for us, in the time that we have, I thought what we do since we study on Saturday on Shabbat mornings, I want to start with the study part. And of course, if you, Mark and Mike are going to help us watch, and I'll try to look for your hands. But I want to sort of illuminate why I'm going to end up making this sort of radical point about the presence of eunuchs in this story. And in Esther, there's no less than 12. And each of the, what's really interesting about the Esther story is eunuchs show up in really important and elevated roles throughout the Hebrew canon, throughout all the texts. But in Esther, every single one of them is named. So I want you to just sort of hold that for a second, because the authors named these people. And in any literary form, you know, from then to now and to probably in the future, when an author takes the time to name people, you're called to pay attention to them. And so I think that the readings that Don and I have sort of filtered Esther through are not only justified, but we can never know what an author intends, but I think we can make some pretty clear assumptions about the presence of these people in this text, particularly with other characters of interest, such as women who are haremized, right? These women are in their own vulnerable position. Jews in a vulnerable position during the diaspora, right? Like we're talking, this is, you know, a diaspora story. It's a comedy. It's almost, you can see where Shakespeare got Shakespeare stuff, right? From these ancient texts and this ancient kind of literature. And our eunuch pals, my people, which I'll explain here in a second, are kind of like the court jesters in a way, or the Shakespearean fool, right? Like you can see where these literary tropes come from if you really read the text closely as literature, right? So we might think to ourselves, we might have a question about, you know, who are these people? What is saris, right? Well, saris is the Hebrew term that becomes the Greek term eunuchos, right? There are even older Semitic forms of the word. There's Akkadian words. There's all these words for this group of people who we tend to think of as involuntarily castrated servants. People who are, saris means a castrate, a person who's been castrated. as does eunuch. But they come to also have this sort of position in the culture, in the society, as servants, which they were, and there's a reason some of them were castrated, right? You don't want the attendants of your harem making babies. Not in this patriarchal culture that these stories are encased in, right? But the fact that every language in that region and during a very long period of time, which I'm going to illuminate for you, the fact that we have words for these people suggests that we understood they were there, right? They existed, and not all of them were made so by other humans. So it's early, Mark and I were talking earlier about Jeremiah and the eunuch. It's a eunuch who saves the prophet Jeremiah from the pit. That's an elevation of these vulnerable, marginalized people as they're elevated in Esther. That we can date to probably 6th century before the Common Era. As early as the 2000s BCE, we see references to Ishtar and Marduk on stele and all kinds of stories, right? Myths and legends. So we know we're dealing at least from the 6th century BCE to 600. I want you to just have this period in your head. 600 Common Era, which is sort of the close of the formal Talmud with the Babylonian, with the Babylon, right? So here we have this span of time that covers several centuries where our ancestors are talking about these people, these Saracen eunuchs. And they're talking about them in various social contexts. So we know that the term didn't just literally mean castrate, person who's been castrated. It referred to people who were born with a different sex, what we would think of as sex, reproductive organs and primary and secondary sex characteristics, other than the poles in the binary of absolute masculine or male, absolute female or feminine. It also referred to people of different genders, like different ways of presenting their sense of self-understanding as a person who has gender. It also referred to people who were celibate, people who were asexual, people we would think of in these terms, right? The terms we would use when the word saris or eunuch gets bantered around, we would use in terms of sexuality words like bisexual, or gay, or lesbian, or pansexual, or asexual, or celibate. Eunuch could mean all of these things, and Don, I believe, can illuminate this for us in Christendom with a text from Matthew. You remember that?
There is a text from Matthew.
Yes.
I know what I want to say about it. Remind me which one it is. I don't do the numbers.
It's 19 verse 11.
Yeah. I think it's a section where Jesus is talking about, he's responding to some questions, as is common. There are folk trying to pin him down. It's one of those gotcha conversations. And the questions are about marriage rules. And they're trying to trip Jesus up on, okay, Jesus, if things are like you say they are, then what about this? A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And one of the questions they're asking is about the rules around marriage after death of the husband. And basically, Jesus answered the same way one of my friends did back in Richmond, Liam. I had a conversation with a friend who was a chaplain at the place I worked. I was working with a bunch of United Methodists at the time, which was fun. If you don't know me, get them all. They're good folk.
They're okay.
Yeah, they're great folk. But we were having this conversation, and she was observing that the difficulty with most of our cultural conversations around sexuality is, think of like a baseball game. Most of our attention assumes that what's most important is what happens between all the actions between the pitcher and the batter. 80–90% of the actions between the pitcher and the batter. So it's easy to forget that, like, there's a third baseman, there's a center fielder, there's a right fielder, there are people in the stands, there are vendors selling hot dogs out here under the bleachers. There are people that play games that don't even take place in this stadium. You know, so to try to narrow the conversation to what is the essence of baseball down to the action that takes place between the pitcher and the batter is how we approach our understanding of sex, sexuality, gender, expression. It's like there's just so much more going on that we just don't happen to be paying attention to. Doesn't mean it's not there, doesn't mean we're not sitting right in the middle of it. Okay, that's the way Jesus answered the gotcha question.
Nice spin on
That
it.
comes in, okay, because what they do to him basically is they're like, okay, you know, they're trying to pin him down on this one narrow point, and basically Jesus says, you know what? There's so many more kinds of people. Like there are people who were eunuchs from birth. There were people who were made eunuchs. Y'all are trying to have this teeny tiny little conversation. I ain't got time for it. Like he never even responded.
Yeah, that's basically what he said.
Yeah, he's never even responded to the gotcha stuff. It's like, man, this conversation is so much bigger than the way you're trying to have it. You know, no.
Yeah.
Not a good time.
What's beautiful is the last thing Jesus says in this verse is he says, so there are eunuchs who were eunuchs from birth.
Yeah.
There are eunuchs who were made eunuchs by others, which Talmud has some things to say about. And there are people, eunuchs, who make of themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven.
What's the verse citation again?
Matthew 19, verse 11. I'm schooled in Christian text, by the way. I picked this stuff up in seminary.
And way better with details than that.
Okay, so keep this in mind. So that's first century. Jesus is doing his thing. If there was a historical Jesus, Jesus was doing his thing as the Mishnah was being codified. Like, so we knew there were all these oral teachings, but during that, from what, 20 CE to 220, all of that is being codified and written down. And Jesus is doing his thing. And folks like Matthew are coming back long after Jesus died and telling these stories. So there's this groundswell of information that what Jesus was teaching is true and has always been true. And how we know this is from our own Talmud. Today's daily page, even the daf for today, is actually, when I read this, I geek out on Talmud every morning. That's how I start my day, along with the Moadon, right? So today, the commentary is on this section in the Talmud where the rabbis are wrestling, Rav Asi and some others are wrestling with the right marriage, right? Like, so the man has died. What do we do? The brother marriage, right? So what do we do though with people who are, if you want to pull up the thing, we're going to share screen. So use the chat if you want to chime in here in a second. What do we do with people who were Elonit, which in Hebrew basically means barren, right? But it's also a codification of one of the 8 genders in the Talmud. So the Talmudic sages recognized 8, no less than 8 genders. And we've all been fed this narrative that there are only 2. More importantly, we refer to these as 8 genders, but they're actually sexes too, right? So sex is about bodies, how bodies are configured, how chromosomes are structured. And even before we knew what a chromosome was, our ancestors understood that something was going on in some bodies. And that's different than what was happening in what they perceived to be the majority of bodies. Like Don's saying, forgetting about all the people in the stands and the vendors and the other folks. And so today's daf, they're saying, wives and their co-wives of who are Elonit are exempt from the rules about levirate marriage. okay? And it's Sarah Ronas, I believe is the person, yes. Sarah Ronas is Associate Professor of Theology at St. Mary's University. And her commentary about what do we do with this understanding of the Elamite, I'll get to this in a second, actually identifies a particular set of what we would now call intersex conditions, that is between sexes. But most intersex people recognize too that their beingness is somewhat beyond sex and gender. She says, we should not be surprised that the rabbis complicate ideas of gender and sex and recognize that these binaries don't actually reflect the complexities of human bodies and human experience. So I'm just giving you that in case you need some proof texting, right? This is not just nonsense Liam is making up. We have known this, and people have been talking about this for centuries. And where it shifts, where this awareness shifts, is in the movement of these warrior class people who have become also the elite ruling class that we see we're wrestling. Esther's wrestling with those people. The Jewish people are wrestling with those warrior class, elite ruling class people. And after Constantinian Christianity develops, when the emperor says, we will be this religion, and we will be this warrior class of ruling elites, this ancient knowledge got kind of pushed to the side. And my people become the forgotten people who were then abnormalized to such extent that in modernity in this country, when an intersex child was born, we mutilated it. Determined for that child what sex and gender they would be, often without discussing it with the parents. And yet, the Talmudic sages knew these people existed. So Zachar literally means male organ. This is about biology. Nekava, female, the verb means to be pierced or to pierce, right? Depending on the conjugation. The noun and or adjective is one who is pierced or penetrated. The entire culture and the power dynamics of ancient culture that our texts and our religion and our traditions came up in was based on what we might think of to be sort of crass for a moment, penetrators and those who were penetrated, with women even below supposedly male persons who were penetrated. So it's this hierarchy of sex and genders with supposedly born males at the top who were warrior class, ruling class elites. So androgynous is a person with presumably both male and female primary and secondary sex characteristics, which we now know is a true intersex condition. Question. Is there a Talmudic reference to those who are?
Is there a Talmudic reference to those who celebrate?
Who are celibate.
Who are celibate? They might celebrate.
So, yes.
Or asexual.
Yes, so the use of these words, again, apply not merely to bodies, but in the social context to how people behave sexually, right? And what was most important in terms of the law was sex for procreation. But as we just saw in today's daf, where they talk about men who married alienote people knowing they were alienote.
Mm-hmm.
Sex wasn't just about procreation, and neither were relationships. So you have the two, right? People lacking sexual or reproductive characteristics and or behavior. So those people would be people who were celibate or asexual, or just didn't seem interested, or we don't know. Alienot Hama, presenting female at birth, then later, often at puberty, developing male physiological characteristics. Alienot Adam, people who are born supposedly female and later developing male characteristics through human intervention. That's my people. Saris Haman, presenting male at birth, later naturally developing female characteristics. Saris Adam, presenting male at birth and later female through human intervention. There's no value judgment placed on these genders or sexes. They simply are known to be. And in Esther, we see them, 12 of them named one by one by one. We see them lifted up with women who are haremized, with a Jewish woman, and in the midst of Vashti, who dares to say, no, I will not parade around in front of you in nothing but my little crown, so that you drunken slobs can ogle me and, what, no, I will not, that's the line. I know I have very limited agency, but that's the line. And I'm willing to risk whatever happens to me to say no. Think about these people. We have XL Jews, yes,
Well, can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of things I would love to just jump in.
I'm sure you would.
Can I?
Yes, please do.
So one is when Vashti draws that line, and what you just said, so whatever happens, happens. Like if that means it's the enemy, like, okay, it's exactly what Esther does.
Yes.
When she says, if I perish, I perish. Now, she needs it seems she needs more coaxing for that, right? When Mordecai's like, look, don't think you're gonna survive this episode if you just sit there on your hands. You gotta do something.
Yes, not gonna
And,
be good.
and then she turns and she's like, okay, I got the message. And she actually follows Vashti in that moment. But both Vashti and Esther are these, to use that word, of marginalized.
And variously oppressed, yeah.
Right, and yet in a position of great power because Vashti uses her, she's like, okay, I got some power in this moment. Now, again, I could pay for this, and we don't hear from her again, but at least I sent a message to tell all the other women out here, we actually can do something in this moment, even in a remarkably difficult moment. Can I challenge you a little bit on the Zachar Mikeva business?
Yes, you can.
Or does that need to wait for later, or?
Well,
And I
can
can
you
challenge, I don't wanna sound like a.
Can you give me a minute first?
I'll give you a minute. even
So, yes, so back to them, and then I know you have, and then we want to talk questions here, but I also want to tell you what I think we can take from this story for us. But then because there's a lot to be said about this. In my book, actually, I wrote a whole chapter on these two, and a lot of it got cut by my editor, but it was too much. And I was like, no, it's not, people can understand it. But anyway, these words, how they're used is what's important, right? So Zachar comes to be used to mean male. There are lots of words that mean male in Hebrew. So it's interesting, I think, always to pay attention to which one's being used in the text and how it's being used.
Is it like man, guy, dude, bro? I mean, like, is that?
Kind of, sometimes it's diminutive, sometimes it's a
Okay,
diminutive term, sometimes it's ish, which could also mean spouse, right, like husband. Right, or sometimes it's Zachar, like it is in Genesis. I seriously do a whole chapter on that. Sometimes we have teaching on that if y'all want, but, and Nekavah has different, depending on how, Hebrew changes with prefixes and suffixes, that's the way it functions. But I don't think we can ignore the roots of the words, right? Like the roots tell us something about how people used and understood the words. So these other words, though, these are the only contexts really that they're used in, right? Like you don't see Elonit Haman, you might see Elonit for barren, you might see Saris for castrating, but you don't see them in these configurations outside of this particular awareness of bodies in terms of sex and bodies in terms of gender. You want to say?
Yeah, let me, do you want me to keep the share screen up or do you want me to?
Whatever you think is appropriate.
You had another chat. Somebody else.
Yeah,
Oh,
there's
yes,
something
I'm
popped up
gonna,
there.
let me, the chat, thank you, Matthew wrote, doesn't the Midrash describe Vashti as a very vain woman who had Jewish slaves and made them work on Shabbat. Why is she held up as an ideal for other women today? Boy, I don't know that midrash.
There are some that imply that.
Isn't that fascinating?
There's several midrash about Vashti. So let's
They'll
just.
probably tear her apart because the rabbis don't mind tearing apart, especially a
But
non-Jewish
remember
queen.
the
She's
context.
very, right, yeah.
Remember the context of how we get into this whole story. I mean, okay, as a product of Generation X, the first thing that jumped out at me as I'm reading Esther is, okay, we're gonna have a 6-month party.
With lots of drinking.
Yeah, okay,
Lots of
so this scene happens at the end of a 6-month bender. The part that caught my eye as a proud product of Generation X was the way they decided to find their way out of a 6-month bender was a week-long party to wind down, right?
Yeah,
I mean, just let that be real for a minute. Just imagine having just gone through 6 months and a week
Of spring break.
of royal scale party.
Yeah.
Royal scale party. Just what kind of mindset is everybody in? She's like, yeah, no, I'm done. I'm done. I mean, this is time for this to be over.
yeah,
Like, so you just get the weirdness of the whole, just the moment that they're in, this whole thing kicks off.
so, yes, and then add to that.
Yeah.
Our tendency later. Right, like when we look back and reflect on these texts, which is what we do in our current culture too. Our tendency to just vilify people because they have one particular practice or one particular behavior that we take issue with. And so I'm gonna say something as a person has spent their entire life being treated the way we can read Vashti if we just focus on the bad things she did. And her wrongness is not one of us, right? People, all human beings do bad things. And if we only see them as that thing, then we too participate in othering ourselves and them. And we never get to a point where we learn how to live together in our difference, right? People discount me and my people simply because we're abominations. We choose to be bad. And yet we strive to accept people and meet people where they are, even when they misgender us. I was misgendered at the hospital yesterday, taking my mother to the doctor. Can you believe? I was. Right? Like, so I'm saying, yes, Vashti did some icky things according to the Midrash. We don't know, none of us were there. But what we do know is she was a member of an oppressed group of women in a society and culture that oppressed women anyway. And she drew a line that we can all learn to draw. We can all learn to draw that line for ourselves and for others, because here's the thing I take away from this text, from some texts about Elijah and just a whole bunch of texts. This story points out, and by gathering together in one place, in one story, as co-collaborative liberators, every possible oppressed group, right? We have our Jewish ancestors, we have women who are haremized and sexually objectified. We have eunuchs, all manner of them. We cannot assume all of them were made eunuchs for the purpose of servitude. All of them gathered together and taken down the bad guy to liberate our ancestors. So here's my thing. Don, you've heard me say this before, and I'm interested in what you think, and then I want us to take questions and your comments. And yes. This story shows us how way too often the people who stand up for disenfranchised, marginalized, and oppressed people are almost always other marginalized, disenfranchised, and oppressed people. There's something not quite right about that. And so what I have come to believe is that as long as it remains the oppressed who care for and tend the oppressed, the disenfranchised who seek to try to liberate and help and lift up the disenfranchised, there will always be oppressed, marginalized, and disenfranchised people. There will be no justice for any of us. As long as it is only the people who have everything to lose who are willing to lose it for what's right.
Modern media doesn't make it easy the way we prefer to do storytelling.
True.
I let my kid, I have 2 daughters. I let my daughters watch various versions of Star Wars way too early, way too young, you know. And as a result, as they were trying to make sense of the story, their most frequent question was, "Daddy's that a good person or a bad person?" Okay, now, like in Star Wars, that's easy to answer. But it's, you know, it shouldn't, you know, it's like, but I used to get so troubled by that question because it's like that question shouldn't be so easy to answer.
No.
And so even while we were watching Star Wars, I would find myself saying to my daughters, who weren't they weren't asking for all this existential crap. They were just trying to follow the Star Wars movie, you know. It's like,
Yeah,
I'm
but
way
they got you for
overcomplicated.
that.
Right. So, you know, I find myself even trying to explain Star Wars to my 2 young children. You know, I'm like, well, it's not a bad person. It's a person who's done a lot of bad things.
Right,
You
like,
know,
yeah, our
yeah.
ability to separate behavior from personhood is essential to learning to live together.
Oh, gosh. Yes. Okay, so I have to say a couple things. First, I'm really feeling at home here because I didn't realize that one of the things we have in common is bashing Constantine and Christianity. I didn't know that's a thing y'all do too. So it's like, that's what.
Well, we want to be respectful.
No, I don't. No, I don't. Not of that. But no, I mean, that's a common perspective among at least the.
Our sheer existence tends to, from its,
Yes.
just the fact that we are already is making a commentary on a certain level, right?
You know, in the branch of the Christian family tree that I climb around in, we blame a lot of stuff on that. When we became the empire point under Constantine, we were way better when we were the underdogs, and so it's way familiar to hear folks bashing on Constantine empirical Christianity.
It's one of the reasons we're pals.
Exactly, right. You know, okay, yeah, and another thing about being here this morning, I'm not for love or money gonna sit here and try to teach Torah to you folks. That's just not gonna happen. I do know a story I'd like to tell you. Okay, so you know, I hear the wisdom of Ecclesiastes. There's just nothing new under the sun. You know? There's just, so you get all these.
Make sure you speak up, so.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Where's
The microphone's up there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get all these, you've got all these, this rich textured awareness of gendered understanding.
Yes.
Okay. There's a question about what the existence of that represents. Does that mean there was this period of time where everybody got that? I question that.
No.
I think the existence of it probably means, no, there was at least once in history that we could live up to again, a worthy resistance effort to ignoring all of this.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I would, yes.
Right. There was this moment of time where somebody was paying attention. And we could do that well ourselves. I mean, that's the way I hear it. The story it reminds me of is, so in a previous life, I used to run a foundation for a Christian group. And most of what we did was either raise money for endowments or we would manage money that we were like a community foundation for our community. We manage other people's money. So there was a point in that I inherited that foundation when it had about $20 million under management. And you really can't manage any kind of foundation economically feasibly until you have about $50 million, just kind of math. Really doesn't matter who you are, or what you're about. So we were in that phase where we were trying to grow into ourselves with our revenue picture and all that stuff. We weren't there yet. We were within months of being insolvent. I was gonna have to go back and tell our denominational parent that we needed to go back on the dole. Because they'd all gotten really happy and had a big celebration about a year earlier when they hired me and stopped supporting the foundation out of the parent budget. That was not gonna be a fun conversation. We got a gift of hundreds of thousands of dollars from a man I didn't know personally. It made all of it.
I knew him.
Yeah.
And for reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I found out from his cousin, who really is more like a sister and who became a dear friend of mine to this day, was that her cousin was a banker. So he understood financial minutia. He understood that nobody else would care about keeping our lights on. Everybody else wants to pay for sexy stuff, you know? And so he gave us that gift completely unrestricted, so we could just use it for our operating expenses. He knew there was probably never going to be anybody else in the movement that would do that understood the importance of just infrastructure. He died from a head injury. He was a volunteer in a hospital, slipped and fell, traumatic brain injury, same thing that killed my mom. He was in the hospital volunteering the Sunday morning that he slipped and fell because his church had shown him for being gay. He would have been sitting in pews that morning when he slipped and fell, cracked his head and died. I'm not saying they have blood on their hands, but I think it all. He was the first person literally to sign up for the annual gathering of the group that I used to work for. They're not that old. He was the very first person to sign up for the very first meeting. And somebody administratively happened to let him know that. Before he left the first meeting, he signed up for the second one. For 20-something years, he was the first human being that signed up every year. I mean, he once he knew it, he made sure he was the first one to sign up. That particular organization has openly argued about what kind of posture to have toward gay folk, trans folk. Yeah, for a long time. And it's been and the tenor of the conversation behind closed doors has always been, well, we all think that it's probably the right thing to do to be welcoming and affirming, loosely defined. A lot of people mean different things when we use those terms, but we're not sure that all our people will agree with that, and we might lose money. Some churches might not want to stick with us, might not want to keep sending us money. So we better not do that. I got asked a question one time, which is a bad thing to do to me. And the question, so there was an annual banquet being held for this foundation. I hadn't been there in 4 or 5 years. My predecessor had just retired. I mean, my successor had just retired. So they didn't have a president that year at the annual banquet, and the exec of the mother organization had been asked to speak at that year's annual banquet, and he called all the former presidents and said, what's the essence of what do you remember? I want to be able to sort of give a retrospective of all of your tenures here, and what would you say for your time? And I said, well, there are a couple things that are easy to remember. I ticked off a couple of points. I said that there's really only one place my mind lingers every time I look back. And I have permission to say these things from the sister who's the cousin who's still here. But the only thing that I remember is how we failed to honor the full humanity of who John Alford was, because we were embarrassed by the fact that he was gay, and what it might mean for us to associate with him publicly and lovingly and lavishly the way he deserved. Now, it's complicated though, you know, people behave in strange ways when they're in oppressive situations like Vashti. Now, John himself never wanted to be anybody's poster child. He didn't want to be the one who started a difficult conversation in his beloved denomination. And so he never would have pushed anything. So when we told his story, we didn't tell his whole story because he wouldn't have been a troublemaker. His sister and I talked more as the organization's conversations about how to relate to the gay folk, trans folk, queer folk. As those conversations got more public, I talked with his cousin and I said, you know, now that he's not the one who started the conversation, now that the conversation's already started, I can't help but think he would participate. She said, you know, I think you're probably right. And so when I was asked what story I could remember that mattered, that captured the essence of what was true while I was at the foundation, I told him, there's really only one story I can remember, and that's how we owe it to John, because there are people sitting around today who are calculating, making financial calculations about our moral community decisions. And it's not fair that they don't have all that, if folk are allowed to be crass if they want to be, but if folk are gonna be crass enough to make those kinds of practical financial based calculations on whether or not to include people, they ought to at least have all the data. They ought to at least know that at one time in their own story, there was a gay man who bailed them out to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars while they're contemplating whether or not they're afraid to lose some on this. It's like, you have no idea the debts you already have, you know, that you're not considering to people who've been far more loyal to you, first person to sign up every year to attend the gathering, than our organization had ever been loyal to him. I talked to his sister and I said, you know, I'm not sure John was just protecting us when he wasn't a troublemaker. I think,
feel real sure he wasn't.
yeah, I think he was protected, but it took me longer to get it, Liam.
Yeah,
It took me longer to get it, and I told her, I said, and I don't think his cousin had ever thought of it this way either. And I said, you know, I think he was using the language of protecting us because that's what was easy for us to hear. But I think he knew if the question of whether or not he was welcome ever got put to too fine a point, we would finish breaking his heart.
sure.
I think he was protecting himself and helping us avoid, and colluding with us to avoid the question. Now, all of that to say, it is sometimes borderline, no, it's not borderline. It's evil when we tell stories in ways that are simple instead of true.
Yes,
And what I love about Esther is, Esther tells this beautiful story that happens to include this rich cast of characters, which I bet large sums of money populate every story we hear, all the time, everywhere. Whoever wrote Esther paid attention and included.
exactly, Michael, right? Like, so I'm not saying.
That's all I have to say.
That's beautiful. I'm not saying that all our ancestors were oh so enlightened beyond us. What I'm saying is, occasionally, and very often throughout our people's records and ways of dealing with the world and historical conversations and written documentation, understood the world wasn't binary. And certainly human beings weren't. And that we had to wrestle with that together, right? Like we had to work through how we treat one another, how we view one another, and how we interact and love one another in our difference. And sometimes somebody told a story lifting up these very people. And Esther is one of the few, lifts them all up together. It's hard not to notice that, is all I'm saying. You have wisdom, and then I'm hoping we have questions.
Can I add one dot to my line? To his credit, the retired exec to whom I refused to give more than one story used the story.
That is cool.
That's a perfect segue for what I've been stewing on over here.
There you go.
I've been watching you stew.
Oh, I did, there's so many places I wanted to jump, but I can only jump so many times. But there's one thing that I really thought was, is to redeem Ahasuerus, the king.
Oh, yes.
Who we so
yes.
hold up as this buffoon, and he kind of is. I mean,
Yeah.
he's drawn that way by the writer, whoever the writer was.
And let's face it, it's usually not hard as a writer to draw a king that way.
Yes. Yeah.
He's got the 180-day party, followed by another 7.
Right.
He's got this is a drunken brawl. Every party that's mentioned it's a mishtet. It's a drinking party,
Yes.
specifically the word that's in Hebrew.
And there's what, 200 women in his harem or
There's a
something?
whole
Yeah.
thing going on, and clearly there's a lot of wealth because the harem, these women have nothing but oils and perfumes. And
Takes a whole year to get ready.
and the whole thing, right? Okay. So I want to redeem, and part of this is my challenge. The words of Zachar and Nekeva, I don't think that they are pejorative or meant to be bad.
No,
Because the Zachar is masculine and Nekeva is feminine, and really it is about the male organ and the female opening.
Yes.
Right, so those are non-judgmental terms. It's literally it's biological matter. Now, we know that in so many societies that women did have a secondary role in so many ways. But when I think about Ahasuerus, that he does the right thing. When Esther tells the truth
Yes.
and doesn't simplify it, and it's like, he's like, well, who would do that? Who? And he goes, Asa, who's that? Who Aish or whatever. It's just very simple, but like, what are you talking about? Killing the Jews.
Yeah.
What do you? Literally, he was drunk when he signed the paper.
Yes.
So, and he's still responsible as the king. And as soon as he finds out, it's like, whoa, my whole structure is just, give me a minute in the garden. I gotta pull this together. I gotta think, I'm about to lose my second in command. What does this mean? And it was my wife. And he walks back in and it says that he's, Haman is on her couch. Well, that's not a freaking, and that's it, man. Off with your head. Forget whatever plans they just had out in the garden. You're out of here, mister. And so are your 10 sons, by the way. And
then he goes to the extreme of the reversal of everything.
well, and so
Yeah.
we're stuck in the societal structure that where we live. So how do we operate within that? He can't just be like, oh, by the way, we're getting rid of that edict, so cancel all battles. What he can do is he can issue a new edict that says the Jews can defend themselves. And everybody is so like, literally, it's the Pachad Yehudi, the fear of the Jews has settled in on the entirety of either just Shushan or the whole 127 provinces. And we have a word that shows up once in the entire Bible, and it is a made up word in many ways. And it says that the entirety of the kingdom, mityahadim. Now, this is how we know the story just couldn't possibly be true, because when did everyone want to become Jews? Right?
Yeah.
And so they take the word Yehuda, Yehudim, Jews. By the way, it's the first time we're ever called Jews specifically. We're not called like Bnei Israel or whatever that is. We're referred to. This is clearly an exilic. Yes.
Yeah.
We are this is a diasporic story entirely. In fact, I even heard a theory this week. Fascinating that it was actually the story was written in Israel by Greek-speaking Jews who are effectively saying, if you don't live in Israel, that's what happens to you. Written during the Second Temple period.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really interesting way to look at it also. And so they take the word Yehudim and they make it a reflexive verb, the hitiyahid. The root for Jewish in Hebrew is not Yehudim, is not Yud Hey Daled. It's Yud Daled Hey. Now, here, Hey Daled Hey, Lahodot, to give thanks.
Yes.
So they totally make this word up. It's part of a very funny thing that they should do that. And the idea that everyone wants to be Jewish, great. a nice translation we could do is everyone befriended
Hmm.
in total modern parlance, that all the people were allies of the Jews.
Yes,
And they took the side of the Jews, like, we're not gonna attack them. If they wanna, they should just be, and we're on their side. It's like when there's a terror attack and everyone says, I'm this person too. And it's, and so that ultimately, the Persians, the people of Shushan, Ahasuerus, they do the right thing, but they need some serious
It needs
direction
nudging.
and some serious nudging. And when he realizes, oh my God, this is in my own house, this is happening. And by the way, when it comes to the eunuchs, right, their voice is absolutely present. I like to spin that one of the eunuchs, Hatach. I mean, I think it would work better, and I says that if the root was Hatach,
Yes.
the het not a hey, but it's close enough, sure. It's to slice.
Yes.
So it's the sliced guy, but that might be too much, but okay. But it doesn't, just because you're a marginalized person or you're on the side, doesn't mean you're necessarily good. I mean, Big Time and Teresh were the ones who were planning to kill the king off with their head, that's right. Right, you can't take down you. So that's all that's been stewing over here, and I think that we need nudging at times.
we do, and
And I think the inclination is to do the right thing. But sometimes you have to be, so with that foundation story, which is foundational. Right? That it takes a while.
well,
And
there's risk.
someone's got, and sometimes, I mean, it's terrible what happened to your friend, I mean, it's just awful. At many levels. It's memory should be blessed. But it takes someone often in a very quiet way, just as, this is what you gotta do. And then you and others who stand up and say, right, and this guy was gay. Just to be clear, there are gays among us, they're contributing significantly to our well-being. No reason, if they don't do good deeds, we need to call them on a non-good deed, but not because they're gay, like, there's more interesting things to tag somebody on.
Yeah,
Right?
but yeah, like we're always saying, because people have the, well, you know how it is to be a marginalized group of people, but no, we don't know each other all over the world, and two, not all of us are nice people, right? But that's
Right.
not the point,
Right.
in a way.
And I so appreciate also, Lynn, when you're talking about that, whatever to not peg a person as one thing. Oh my God, he's an anti-vaxxer, I'm never gonna talk to him again. It's terrible, what's the matter with that idiot? It's a person. Maybe there's more to the story. Right, let's dig back on in that.
Well, it stops us from having the
You can't have
human
a conversation.
conversation
You can't have like this.
that will, I believe, will save us. To me, one of the things that's in this story, and you sort of snatched my thunder, but this is why we're pals. No, it's because, my capstone on this is if the king could be moved, then any of us can.
Amen.
And it's human relationships, it's being willing to be with one another, and all the ickiness and messiness and the ambiguity and the bad behavior and the good behavior that will save us, that will get us to a point where even those with privilege and proximity to power or some degree of power will stand up.
Go with him, go with him.
No.
You're stuck right in the middle of it. This idea of agreeing to disagree.
Or to still talk to each other.
Yeah, no, yes. However, okay, so both sides of that coin, because I agree with everything. This is not a response to what you just said. Because I agree with there's always more to the story. We don't have monodimensional identities, all that kind of stuff. But this is a fraught path.
Yes, it is.
Okay, because
Yes.
this idea of, well, let's just agree to disagree. Agree.
That's not.
Boy,
always
that's
possible.
and it's not even always honorable or desirable to me, because I heard that phrase differently just within the last week than I've ever heard it what I think people are really saying, if we agree to disagree, what we're saying is, you know what, Lynn? I like the good parts of this relationship and I only want those.
Yes,
I don't want any responsibility to have to be my authentic full self with you. And I really don't want to be bothered with all of you.
exactly.
That's what saying, let's agree to disagree.
But I wanna be clear,
Can mean. Yeah.
that's not what, I don't hear either
No,
one of
that's what I'm saying.
Right.
This was not a response to that.
Well,
It's
no,
just
what
what
happens,
happened.
you're gonna agree with Putin? And say,
No.
oh, I disagree that you're attacking Ukraine. Well, we
Right,
can
right,
agree to
right.
disagree on things.
Right, there's a point, that's the stand-up part, right? The stand-up part is when, okay, I get, you may not be a horrible person, but this thing you're doing is so horrible that we have to stop you. Right, or we have to say,
I'm gonna
no.
reach on the other side of the
Yeah,
barricade,
this-
because it's, you know.
That's a bridge too far. But what people hear when they talk about, when they hear people talking about relationship is agree to disagree. And that got us
That's right.
where we are.
That's
I
exactly
think,
right.
yeah.
I think exactly right. It's like. This happens at least once every other. I lost my train of thought. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah.
Well, I'm
and-
watching the time now, listen, I always try to be mindful of time, and we always say we're
Yeah.
gonna close around 11:30, and if anybody needs to leave, I understand that it's all right. But we've just chatted the whole thing up here.
We did not intend to do that. Y'all should know what happens when we.
But you have to know that people that I bring in, it tends to be more for myself than anybody else, because I wanted to spend time with Don, let's be clear, I get to.
You invited a Baptist preacher and gave him a microphone.
Right.
That means things. I'm not sure you realize what all that means.
Trust me, I understand. Folks, was there-
Lots, there's three, what is that, 5 or 3? I can't see.
we've got like
Five.
9 screens total up there, one of us is, 2 of us are us though, one's me and one's the room.
Yeah.
All right, anybody wants to
There's-
chime in?
There's stuff in the chat and Lindsay.
Yeah, that's all, we read all those.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, good.
Yeah, I just didn't pull it up there. Lindsay, you wanna say something? And if
You
there's-
know, very quickly, you have mentioned in the very beginning castration. I'm not familiar, although you talk about changing the name Hatar to Hatar. You
Hatar.
mentioned as physical castration, the surgical castration of an individual. What I seem to find in the story of Esther is an enormous soap opera. Where
Yes,
people are not, you cannot necessarily say that they were eunuchs who are castrated individuals. Does that necessarily mean that they were physically castrated, or makes people marginalized emotionally or socially castrated from society, just like Haman was trying to castrate the Jews from
so
society?
what you just did is, to me, beautiful literary criticism, right? That's what literature invites for us to do, is to say, is this word functioning only as a descriptive, right, or as a noun? Or is it too part of the allegory? Is there more to it? Are we talking about imposed impotence? Well, certainly we are. These are, and their ability to find where they do have
Which would
agency
elevate
and
those
power.
individuals even higher.
Yes, and then they find where they do have power.
And this
use
is
it.
where we as a people find ourselves generation after generation, as though those warrior-like societies want to castrate those other individuals from their society.
Preach, Lindsay.
No.
You're right though. Right?
Yeah.
This kind of emotional
It's too late.
castration is brilliant.
Yeah,
Great, other thoughts, comments? It's okay if not.
Thanks, Mom.
Margot's.
I know.
I love it. That's it.
I'm so tickled you all are here.
It's great to be together.
Yeah, I love it when some of my favorite, not that I should have favorite people, but I love it when some of my favorite people are here. Makes me feel good. Don, you're meeting my people.
I'm thrilled. I'm ecstatic. This has been a lot of fun. I have to say this, between college and seminary, I took 6 semesters of Greek and 1 semester of Hebrew. And in one semester of Hebrew, I learned, understood, and retained more than I did in 6 semesters of Greek.
You don't have a Greek brain.
No, I
You're
don't.
not that-
And that's what I learned. And so now, the truth is, I didn't retain enough of either one of them to claim any functional expertise. I have conversational familiarity, that's about it. But I learned in one semester's time that big parts of my heart and soul long for your holy language. And one of my reasons I enjoy Bible Bash so much is Liam's my favorite Hebrew teacher. And I've been around.
I don't know that we could call me a Hebrew teacher,
That
but
may
that's
mean
so
different,
sweet.
that may mean different things in this room from what I mean by, I don't know, but that's, Liam's heard me say this multiple
He's
times.
plenty good, don't you worry.
Yeah, exactly, right.
You got a good
But
source.
he's one of my favorite, and I've been around some, like, I told Liam, like, when I was in seminary, and I do prefer to say Hebrew scripture, but at the time in seminary, my Old Testament professor wrote the Hebrew textbook that I used to learn Hebrew. I mean, so I've been around people who understood some Hebrew, and so, but Liam's my
Wow,
favorite.
dude, I'm feeling,
Leo's my favorite, and so, but to get to come this morning and hear and speak and sing with you in such lovely ways, it's a real privilege.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you
You're
very much.
welcome here
thanks for
anytime.
coming, brother.
Even if William's not here.
Yeah, appreciate it.
We turn our attention to saying the words of Kaddish, remembering those who have died. I want to share a reading first. Kohelet wrote, Ecclesiastes wrote, the eye never has its fill of seeing. The eye never has its fill of seeing. Young or old, those who depart this life never see enough of the world, never complete their task, never cherish their loved ones enough before they are called home. How they yearn for yet another respite from the final summons, and how we yearn to have them close to us for yet another challenge in our lives, yet another joy, yet another precious moment together. God be now with those whose hearts are broken, because whenever parting comes, it comes too soon. Console them at this moment. Be near to them when light seems distant. Sustain them, O God, until the time of healing. As we think about the loss of life due to terror or tragedy that comes about, and people who stand literally at graveside as we speak in parts of Ukraine, God, we ask you to console them at this moment. Be near to them when light seems distant. Sustain them, O God, until the time of healing. We'll take a moment of quiet before sharing the names of our own whom we're remembering at this time. We remember those in our circle who have died this past year: Peter Thull, Nancy Halewood, Don Bendick, Alfredo Pauca, Richard Lee Roberts, Mary Ann Cross, Judy Spiegel, Tom Loomis, David Friedman, Marian Pranikoff, Aubrey Eisler, Bernice Pinsky, Paul Silverman, Marie Lamey, Gerald McKinney, Trudy Olson, Edith Shrensky-Glock, Helen Schneider, Dorothy Engelhardt, Marge Sosnick, Mona Lieberman, Michael Pollack. If there are any other names to share, you can unmute yourself if you like.
Ruth Greenberg,
Zichronam Livracha, may the memory be for a blessing I'm gonna put the words up on the screen in just a moment, and as you are able, I invite you to please rise. I need to fix our screen for just a moment, please. Words of Kaddish Atom, the mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, ve'almad yivarach chirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon, v'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman karev himru, amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olamei amaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yithamar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, V'yitzhadar v'yitzaleh v'yitzhalal shemet kudesha b'recho la'ela min kol birchata v'shirata v'shbachata v'nechamata ta'amiran b'noma b'miru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu be'al kol Yisrael b'miru amen. Osei shalom b'mrama u'yasei shalom aleinu be'al kol Yisrael b'miru amen. May the one who makes peace in the high heavens above make peace for us and for all of Israel, giving comfort to all who are bereaved and who remember, and let us say. Amen. Please be seated. The words of Vishamra as we celebrate Shabbat and remember this commandment that has been given to us. The artwork that you see here, just by way of further information. That is from, if you remember, Rabbi Shama and Isaac Brinjagar, who were here a few years ago for the paper midrash. They're coming back, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to have them for Shavuot, or better known as Shavuos. That's the difference of the Ashkenazi versus the Sephardi pronunciation. Okay. Yeah. Modern Hebrew uses the Sephardi, so Shavuot. Yiddish is pronounced a little differently, Shavuot. That's going to be great. They're going to do a thing on Saturday night, June 4th. That is more teen and older and adult. And we'll do a dairy oneg. That's coming up, and it is limited registration. Like, you're gonna need to sign up. There's about 40, I think we have room for about 40 people.
What,
for that
on the
night.
20th or?
This is on for Shavuot is on Saturday night, June 4th.
Oh, June 4th for the
June
adults.
4th for the- and then on Sunday morning we'll have Yizkor, and Shimshon is going to read from the actual tablets that we have. We have it carved in stone. We celebrate the giving of Torah Shavuot.
Yeah.
There was a North Carolinian stone cutter who calls the temple one day and says, I don't know if you're interested in this. I mined some stone out of Western North Carolina and I carved, based on the Paleo Hebrew, the Ten Commandments. So we have these two heavy stones.
Yeah.
And
And they're carved on both sides, the way that the Ten Commandments were carved. Are those physically here? Can I see that before?
They're in the other building, absolutely, I'll take you over.
I'd love to see that.
So Shimshon is gonna read from the tablets, we'll do Yizkor, and then they're
That's
gonna
on
do,
the Sunday.
that's on the Sunday morning at 10, and then at 11, they're gonna do a workshop that's gonna be kind of a more free-flowing thing, and that's for all ages, anybody who wants to come to participate in that. So it'll be a very
Because
special
in the
show.
afternoon, there's the winery.
What time?
Well, I don't know if it's like.
That's fine.
Right, remember we did that last year?
Yes,
You were there.
we're gonna do, it's from 11 to 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything else is done. Okay, so Vishamra, talking about wine. If anybody has a Kiddush cup with that'd be great. I do not have one. Maybe later after we hang up, you can get yourself one, and this will count for that. Let me just move everybody so that we can still see the words.
I started saying, we all know it's younger, but Don
I do not.
I know, for Don's
My fol-
sake.
my following
It's
along has been at
Don
about
is
30%.
here, we're gonna all, that's where I want these people. And then
There's our people.
we drop them in there, and here we go. Okay, let's wait. Here we go. B'Shamru b'nei Yisrael et haShabbat la'asot et haShabbat le'dorotam berit olam beini uben b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam oti Shami Asa Adonai, Asa Adonai, Et HaShamayim ve'et ha'aretz ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat la'asot et HaShabbat le'dorotam be'rit olam u'bayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash Shabbat vayinafash Shabbat vayinafash ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat la'asot et HaShabbat le'dorotam be'rit olam. For later, if anyone's gonna drink a little wine, we'll go ahead and say, I say Sabri Chaverim, you say L'chaim, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei v'rikafen. Go drink a little something and enjoy it. Don and Liam, thank you. Thanks for bringing your Torah, your teaching, your guidance, your instruction, your love, your compassion, insight to us here on this Shabbat morning, but to the internet and through Bible Bash. I think it's a genuine contribution, and I just love the double entendre of your title of Bible
You gotta
Bash.
thank Peterson for that.
Yeah.
Peterson came up with it.
And I can say, because I know Peterson, make sure to include the part about how great the double entendre of Bible Bash is.
He would probably love that. So, thank you all. Love and
Thanks, everyone.
peace.
By the way, talking about things real quick, that fall under adult learning and lifelong learning, all that, just pay attention. This Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, a friend of mine, Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, who lives in the Gush, in Gush Etzion in the West Bank. He is one of those Israeli settler people. And he has lived there for about 30 years, and about 25 years into that living, he can tell the story. He's been here before, in Wake Forest and elsewhere. He suddenly realized there were Palestinians living here. Like, it's so obvious. I mean, hello, there are Palestinian villages all over the West Bank and Jewish communities also. And he struck up a relationship with some Palestinians, and they have a group called Shorashim. It's called Roots, and it's about each other respecting, understanding, learning from each other's roots and stories and different experiences, and what it is to be Palestinian, what it is to be an Israeli, what it is to be Jewish, what it is to be Muslim or very much minority Christian, sadly now in the West Bank. And they travel and do some teaching, and we're going to have them here on Tuesday night. We're partnering with Augsburg Lutheran Church for that. Do come if you can. That's at 7 o'clock. I suspect the event will be about an hour and a half, somewhere around there. Next Shabbat, my bride will be doing Torah here. Amy's got stuff planned for that. And then on the 30th, which is a Wednesday night, we have music for food. But I don't know that Ida Bueller is going to play, but there's this fabulous quartet that's going to play. We're partnering with Sika and School of the Arts for that. So that's on Wednesday night, the 30th. So that's all coming up very, very soon.
Cool, so
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. We're gonna do our closing
You wanna do your
tag. You guys can stay if you want or
Yeah, do the closing tag. I feel very nice.
All right,
I'm gonna stop the share. I'm gonna stop the record.
yeah, that's fine.
Thanks, Liam, for those great words on Esther. And thank you, listeners, for joining us another month, live this time, in the recording with Temple Emmanuel and Rabbi Mark Cohen. Thanks for listening to the Bible Bash podcast. Our show is part of the Rock Candy Network.
Thank you, Don. It's been great to have you here. The Bible Bash theme song is Playbill by the Jelly Rocks. It is available on iTunes, Spotify, or through Rock Candy Recordings.
If you have any questions, comments, or requests for passages you want us to cover, or guests you want us to have on, contact us at our website, BibleBashPodcast.com. Again, that's BibleBashPodcast.com.
Bible Bash is a collective. Sorry, Peterson. Bible Bash is a collaborative project created by Peterson Toscano, Liam Hooper, and Don Durham. Our episodes are edited and produced by Peter Toscano. Find out more about Peterson at petersontoscano.com.
Hey, if you tweet us at Bible Bash. If you like what you hear here, and we hope you do.
Why wouldn't you?
And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, rate and review us there. It really does make a difference.
It does indeed. Thanks for listening. We look forward to another Bible Bash with you real soon.
We were,
Oh, thank you, folks.
we were in the studio. I understand.
So now we know